Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. It depends on where you are in the country. Thank you for joining us for the Rainbow Push Coalition and Citizenship Education Fund's annual Media and Telecom Symposium. This year, we're doing our symposium a bit differently this year due to the wake of this ongoing pandemic. I first want to thank all of our sponsors for participating in this particular session. I want to lift up the names of Verizon, Charter Communications, the Motion Picture Association of America, T-Mobile, and Comcast for supporting our efforts with the Rainbow Push Coalition. This symposium will be held over the course of the next three days at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time each day to 1:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our theme this year is charting a path forward for digital education and economic inclusion. Today, session one is entitled Education and the Implications for the Educational Achievement of Black Students. And then on tomorrow, we'll have a session entitled What COVID-19 has Taught Us About Digital Equity or the Lack Thereof. And Friday at 12 o'clock, join us again. We'll be discussing what technology policies can benefit communities of color. Our moderator is none other than our distinguished panelists and laborer in the civil rights effort during technology and telecom. Her name is Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee. She is the Senior Fellow of Governance Studies and the Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institute. But before we share in our panel discussion, we have another special guest, Ms. Randy Weingarten. She's been laboring in this field for a long time, in the educational space for a long time at the American Federation of Teachers. So we want to welcome her and invite her to give us opening comments and remarks.
So thank you, Steve, and it is so wonderful to see the Reverend and to see him smile and to see him here and to be with all of you. And you have an exceptional panel that's going to, I'm sure, talk about all of the issues right now. But let me kind of dive into something that I have been working on for several months. And frankly, we need an economic stimulus to deal with this. I have called as many of the telecom and internet companies as I can, personally begging them to actually get connectivity to kids. Like many of us on the panel, we have connectivity at home. I happen to spend $250 a month for connectivity at home. Tell me how many parents can do that for their kids. Tell me why, in a situation when we have 8 months of COVID, where we know that remote education has a role now and will ultimately have a role afterwards. And this is as the leader who has always said that remote education can't be a substitute, but we know it has a very important role and will have a really important role, just like telemedicine will have an important role. We need to make sure that kids don't just have MiFis or smartphones or things like this. We need to make sure that kids have connectivity, and we need to work on that together. And what it does is that this disproportionately, just like COVID, just like the health impacts, just like the issues about essential workers and the safety impacts, this disproportionately impacts Black and brown kids. So I want you to know you have an ally in this white girl who knows and sees every single day what is happening to our kids when we can't get them connected, when we can't get them back into school for in-person learning, knowing full well we need to actually make sure that we have the safety safeguards in order to do that. This is an opportunity with this new administration to change that. It's an opportunity in the first 100 days to actually get to a COVID stimulus that unemployment insurance, that helps small businesses, that makes sure that our Black and brown businesses do not teeter into bankruptcy, that makes sure that we have the wraparound services in our communities so we can deal with emotional and social issues, that makes sure that we open schools for feeding so we can feed people. There is an opportunity for a renaissance for public education and for a way of actually bringing communities together if we can get the kind of COVID stimulus that the President Trump wanted so much for the cruise industry and the airline industry, but not so much for people throughout America. So ultimately, if I sound urgent, yes, it's an amazing moment because of what's happening with a new administration who believes in Title I, who believes in IDA, who believes in community schools, who believes in economic prosperity for all. But I feel the same urgency as I know your panel does. Every single day, we cannot forsake this school year for kids, and we need to do things, including making sure we have the digital divide. We know that Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives need to matter every single day in everything that we do. And that's us working together, including with the tech companies, including with the unions, including with all the other panelists who are here to do these kind of things. Thank you very much, Reverend, and thank you very much, Rainbow Push.
Thank you very much. Steve?
Yes, sir.
Brandon, good morning, my dear. How are you? Brandon, good morning.
Good morning, Reverend. I'm good. Thank God.
I think we should come this together as a coalition, not just individually. I think we should have a kind of mass impact on them. We focus a lot on broadband for urban and rural areas, but Louisville, 80% is not connected to broadband, no internet services. So, and the citizens and suburbs and the rural affected. So it's so big and so massive, yet it can be done, that we should, we need to go and meet Silicon Valley people out there together, Brandon.
Yeah. And we need to do this through the program. That's part of the reason why I keep now focusing on, so like Detroit has a good program. We help broadband or create broadband in McDowell County, West Virginia. There's lots of good programs. AT&T has a good program, Comcast has a good program. But this has to be all, and this has to be free for parents. And it has to be something that every single parent with a child in school, whether in public school, in private school, in charter school, they have to be entitled to get free connectivity, high-speed free connectivity, so that kids can actually have access to connectivity at home, like radio waves. It has to be as free as radio waves.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Randy. Before we begin our panel discussion, I was remiss to inform our audience. If you'd like to ask our panel questions, you can direct those questions to the comment section in the Facebook Live, or you can hashtag RPC Telecom 2020 on the Twitter feed. So again, you can direct those questions to the Facebook Live comment section or hashtag RPC Telecom 2020 if you're doing Twitter. I'm going to turn our panel discussion over to our distinguished moderator, Dr. Nicole Turner Lee of the Brookings Institute. Hi, Nicole.
Thank you, Bishop Steve. And hey there, Reverend, how are you?
Good.
One of my favorite people. First and foremost, I cannot tell you how honored I am to participate in this new iteration and new version of the Rainbow Push annual Telecom Symposium conference. And let me tell you why. We have actually done this in person, and we know why we're actually over this Zoom network right now. But it actually is a demonstration, not just to the leadership of Bishop Smith, but also the foresight that people like Reverend Jackson and the leaders at Rainbow Push see, that you may not be able to come to us, but we're going to come to you. And we're going to have these conversations around social justice and civil rights that actually matter. I want to apologize. We do have another panelist joining us. She's on Central Time in Marion, Alabama. She's on her way in, that is Dr. Kathy Trimble, who I think you all want to hear about. And not to say anything about all the men on this panel, but we do need another woman to bring a little bit more magic after Randy has left us. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and then get right into the discussion. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee. I am a senior fellow in government studies at the Brookings Institution. I'm also the director of the Center for Technology Innovation. In my spare time, which is always important time to me, I assist the Rainbow Push Coalition with the Public Policy Institute, which for years has focused on issues related to the digital divide, media ownership, and a host of other areas when it comes to the type of infrastructure that we need to bring to both urban and rural communities. I have a forthcoming book next year on Brookings Press on the U.S. digital divide, which is why some of you have not seen me, because I'm holed up to get it to the editor before the end of the year. And it's really based on a qualitative survey across the country asking people about their internet access. And before I jump into the panel and introduce our distinguished guest, I want to say something about what Randy talked about in terms of the importance of getting our children back to school. First and foremost, this pandemic has essentially upturned our basic functions, and now being connected matters. It not only matters in our schools, but it matters in every aspect of our full life as we plow through the public health crisis that we are in right now. And being connected also matters for those Black and brown families who, by the way, are more likely to be the frontline workers who are actually servicing this economy, Black and Latina families and households. But in addition to that, they are highly susceptible to the virus. And as a result of that, we're seeing now for Black Americans, COVID is listing at third at the top of chronic diseases after diabetes and pulmonary heart disease. And finally, we are now facing what I hope we'll talk about on this panel, the imminent threat of a revisit of the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Act. And what do I mean by that? We have 50 million kids that was sent home in March, 15 to 16 million of them that did not have access at home or lacked an internet-enabled device. That is according to research by Common Sense Media. 9 million who didn't have either. And as a result of this lack of connectivity and equity existing among Black, brown, and beige children, we are now seeing that Black children, if they are not connected to any type of formal learning, will be behind 10.3 months in terms of cognitive retention. Latina students around 8+ months, low income, almost a year. So not only are we widening the educational gap or the educational achievement gap, as educators know it, we are also widening the lack of opportunities that may be available to our young people. And what that future of industry looks like is what we're in right now. I mean, I'm a parent. I have a 14-year-old that half the time I don't know what she's studying. I don't know what she's doing because I'm down here on these Zooms. But I can tell you this, it has been difficult because not only are the kids lacking in opportunities educationally, they also have insecurities around food, housing, well-being checks, as well as, if it's not the pandemic, I had 2 superintendents on last week on a panel, it's the California wildfires. So we need to come up with a digital solution, my friends, because as one of the superintendents indicated to me most recently, we are losing kids by the hundreds because they cannot log in. They are now becoming virtually truant. They are missing from the registration rolls of schools. And I've got educators that can speak to some of that nuance. And it is becoming highly difficult to track their progress. I want to say we welcome the common good and the public good of the corporations that are keeping these connections on. Comcast, T-Mobile, and Charter, other companies, some of which are sponsors of this conference. But this is a critical discussion. And I'm actually glad that today I'm joined by educators and people who understand this part of the digital divide. Reverend knows and Bishop Smith knows, and we could talk all day about getting universal broadband access, and I can share that as part of my moderator privilege. But until we understand the actual implications of what is going to happen to our children, we are not going to have the conversation in a way that I think Randy had that conviction, where it is going to impact the next level of equality among our youth and the opportunities that they face ahead. So I want to introduce our panelists. I have with us today is Eric Collazo, who I've actually had the privilege of sitting on a panel. He's a real truthful and honest young man when it comes to this stuff. He's the principal of the Washington Leadership Academy. Raise your hand, Eric. Dr. Kathy Trimble. Now, this young lady right here, she has become my second, I ain't gonna call her my mama because we're probably about the same age, but my second best friend. She is the principal of the Francis Marion School. That is a consolidated school in Marion, Alabama of 700 kids, K through 12. And she is one principal who is not giving up. The other day, I sent somebody down to talk to her. She said, girl, I got on the phone with them, but we were in the middle of the hurricane and I was moving and trying to get my family together. But she is in rural Alabama. The birthplace of Coretta Scott King, as a matter of fact. And she is actually working on this, and she was somebody that I interviewed as part of my book. And then Michael McFarland. Dr. McFarland, I'm going to just say this. My mother's a 30-year educator, a lifetime NAPSE member, the National Alliance of Black Student Educators. And I'm so glad that you are at this table because you also represent the indigenous lived experiences of the educators that are out there working on this issue. So let us welcome everybody. Thank you. So I'm going to jump right into my remaining time, and I want to start with Eric and Kathy. I gave my depiction of what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, what I'm being told. Talk to us a little bit before we jump into the digital disparities that exist, and tell us what you're seeing. You're in two different types of school districts. So I'd like you to first, as you're in your remarks, just sort of tell us about your school district, and then speak to these inequalities that are surfacing because young people do not have access in public K through 12 schools. I'll start with you, Eric.
Sure. So my name is Eric Collazo. I'm the principal at Washington Leadership Academy. It's a public charter school that serves 9th through 12th grade in Washington, D.C. We serve Ward 5. The school demographics, we are 97% African-American and Latina. And we also have a population of students that are free reduced lunch at 90%. But right now, when it comes to like what learning looks like now versus what it looked like at the beginning in March, we've definitely adapted and changed and did different iterations. But one of the most key things that we had to address from the very beginning was that access and making sure that our students had provisions to make sure that they didn't have to just focus on like the actual just academics, but also we had to make sure that we were taking care of their their betterment, their well-being. So we made sure off the bat that we were able to provide them with food and services that they needed. So we were providing them food at first at the school. Thankfully now at this point, we're able to actually have delivery services for those foods so that they don't have to actually expose themselves through travel. And also at the same time, we had to see which parents or which family members had internet connectivity. So we actually surveyed them, we contacted them, reached out, text, email, any kind of form that means that we can get in contact with them. And we basically just had a survey of seeing who needed internet access and how could we help them in that process. We were able to connect them through Comcast Essentials, T-Mobile hotspots. And in some cases, we were able to actually use some of our funds to make sure that we paid off any bills that they had to make sure they were reconnected to the services that they already had. And that was our initial effort. And thankfully, that's helped us and provided a space for us in this current semester where those families that needed those connectivity problems solved originally were able to continue that through the summer and into this semester as well. I think just finally just thinking about it too, and like, it's like the experiences overall. This has been, I mean, we use the word unprecedented all the time. It certainly is. But one of the things that I think has been essential for us as a school is to constantly adapt. In the very beginning, we did see that trickle off where even though we were providing our students with internet connectivity, even though like I think we were very much prepared. We are a school that focuses on computer science. So we gave all of our students Chromebooks that they could take home and bring to school when we were in person. So we already had those materials ready. We were very fortunate. But even with that, we did see a trickle off effect where it was really difficult to get students engaged and learning and just like with this new model. So we had originally in the March and April months, like 60% attendance where students were active. But now, thankfully, through more consistency and a better like solution to having live teach lessons, and in addition to asynchronous work, we now have around 90% of our students engaged. So that's been a definite uptick. But there are some challenges there, and just making sure that kids feel connected, because right now, being at a distance, being at home, there's a lot of intentionality needed to make sure they feel like a part of a school still.
No, I agree with that. My daughter will tell you she just wants to go back to school, right? And then she told me, but I don't want to go back to school and wear a mask for 8 hours. So I don't know if I could actually balance that, but mental health definitely matters. Yeah. Dr. Trimble, you're in rural Alabama. I came out there and visited 2 hours outside of Birmingham. The school that you run it like a genius, just a boss lady, because she knows everybody's name and she high-fives them on the way out. Dr. Trimble was also a beneficiary of the Obama administration Connect Ed program, so her kids had a one-to-one solution. What's going on in Marion, Alabama, and what are you doing to try to solve that as well?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I can echo the sentiments of what Eric just said. When the pandemic occurred, of course, it was like just pump the brakes immediately. And it was almost as if everything in the back of the car was just thrown, pushed forward. And so we had to figure out how to move those things back, how to get to restore some order in that automobile. Some things have worked, and unlike Eric, we're not so fortunate. We don't have a whole lot of resources. We don't have a whole lot of revenues. So we have some challenges on top of challenges. Yes, we have to deal with the well-being of our students. We're in rural Alabama, and the demographics of our school, we're a comprehensive pre-K-12 school. We are 98% African American. We are 97% free and reduced lunch. Our students, when I say rural, some of our students get on the bus in the morning and have to ride almost 2 hours to get to school. And then that's almost 2 hours of going back. So, and the majority of our students, probably 90% of our students, are transported. So as Nicole said, we were fortunate to get the Connect Ed grant back in, with Obama administration. However, please remember, that was in 2014. This is 2020. And we're still trying to operate with when it came to us, we could say it was 6 years old, but almost a decade old of devices, combined with the fact that we have connectivity issues. There's broadband connectivity is like foreign language where we live. We're almost like, and it's sad to say, in comparison to other schools in other districts, it's almost like we're living in a third world country. Nicole just pointed out, we're fighting so many issues here in Perry County that we've almost had to put the internet and the connectivity issue on the back burner. We just came through with Hurricane Zeta. Our students, we are pumping water and literally having to buy water. So we're dealing with water versus Wi-Fi. Which one is most important? Our people are standing in food lines. So it's food versus physics. So we're dealing with a whole lot of things with still on the table of assessments coming down, and we're expected, and our students are expected to perform at the same level everyone else. And there are students who still have absolutely no internet connectivity at all. I'm in the heart of Alabama, where George Wallace stood in the doors of the University of Alabama to prohibit students of color from entering a school of higher learning, so they could receive a formal education, which means prior to Wallace's stint, I might add, the doors of these schoolhouses were blocked to students that look like the students that I work with. Now here we are, some 57 years later, not even a century later, and our students that look just like Vivian Malone and looks just like James Hood are still locked out of the schoolhouse. But instead of being locked out of a brick and mortar building, they're being locked out of a virtual schoolhouse that constitutes remote learning because they have no access to the internet. We have bought hotspots. We have hotspots in places. We place hotspots on buses. They are there. And still at the end of the day, there are some areas that cannot get internet activity. So then you have to ask the question, what do you do? And I can go on and on, but I'm just going to stop right there.
Oh, preach. That's all I got to say. And I say that actually with a lot of respect because Dr. Trimble's superintendent was on our podcast at CTI. We have a Tech Tank podcast, and Dr. Trimble has been on several panels at Brookings. And her superintendent came on, and he made this comment which said, the Black and Latina families in Alabama are the first ones to want to sign up for virtual learning because of the fear of the disease. But they can't do it because they live in areas where he admittedly said the range of systemic inequalities are so deep that they disallow their ability to have that choice. And so I think you have to understand that reality. I had the chance again of visiting this school and spending time with Dr. Trimble and just becoming a friend of hers over these last few months, a year actually. And it really speaks volumes to the lack of access that we have. So we've heard from Michael, Dr. McFarland. We've heard from the side of folks that are out there basically interacting with families and kids, making the best of what they can and creating places. Yes, Reverend.
Yeah, what she's discussing is a well-kept secret.
Yes, yes.
It's covered up.
Yes.
That's why I said, we were a coalition of us who have access to media visibility. Must lay out how many children are being denied this. And they're black, white, and brown, by the way. And they're Appalachia as well as in Alabama. we need to make that case while the cement still wet with the Biden administration, that whoever becomes Secretary of Education needs to hit the ground knowing that we are on this case.
That's right. That's right. And I agree with you, Reverend. And we also, and the reason I'm so happy Dr. Trimble could participate, we also need to, in this new administration, make the case that rural is not just white, that there are Black and brown people that live in rural communities, whether it's in Marion and Perry County or it's on the Black Mississippi Delta, where it's a variety of people that live within rural America, which make it even more important for us to have the data to get to these locations. So Reverend, right on with that, snap to that. We'll get with Steve and we'll bring in Dr. Trimble to figure out how to work on this.
You get some data a while ago about the breakdown of, do that one more time, please.
Yes. Well, what we'll do is we've got, you want to hear from which, well, you know, Reverend, there's 3 doctors on this call.
Give me a hot second. Are you 12-9 something?
Yes. 12-9 in terms of trying to get together a coalition.
No. Go to the doctor. I don't want to hold you up. You gave some data in your presentation about who was in and who was out.
Yes.
You broke it down. That is very important, it seems to me.
Yes, I'll make sure, Reverend, we'll follow up. And Dr. Trimble, I'll follow up with you and Eric to get some of the statistics that you're also sharing. Oh, thanks, Reverend, on that. Let me go to Dr. McFarland just real briefly, and then we'll bring you back in, Reverend, if you have comments towards the end of this. What do you see as a person who represents the administrators and the educators? Like I said, my mother's a lifelong NAVC member. She was a 30-year educator in New York Westchester County Public Schools. But where do you see that role of the association playing to sort of help bridge these gaps?
Well, I'll tell you what I see is kind of what a lot of you all have already kind of articulated and feel. The reality is, you know, our kids with this digital divide, it's been magnified. We know now it's on the front step. It's on our front porch. But the reality is, if we're going to address it, it's going to take, in my opinion, 3 things. We know that integration and all that was about access. Well, what right now, our students simply do not have access at the level that they needed. So now that we know the problem, we got the problem. But what is it going to take to solve it? In my opinion, what I've seen here in my district and also across the nation is it takes first political will. Here's the reality. We went for the last 10 or 15 years talking about one-to-one and going to get one-to-one in place. But the reality is it took us about 2 months to actually make a decision to go to one-to-one. Now, it took some political will. We had to have board members to step up and say, we want our kids to have devices. But what we realized is that just simply having a device is not enough if I don't have connectivity. And then what we realized is connectivity is not enough if I don't have enough bandwidth and speed to be able to process. It's so many other variables in there. But at the first and foremost, we must have a political will. We must have the political will to say that we want all of our kids to have access. And if we say that, what we got to realize is that access to technology is the floor. It's not the ceiling. It is the floor. It is the absolute floor in this new in the world that we're in today. And so access to technology today is like access to a high quality engaging textbook that's relevant to our culture. That was access back then. Right now, if we don't have access to technology, it's like saying several of our students don't deserve access to this textbook. They don't deserve access to this high quality instruction. They don't deserve access to this building and the capacity and all that things. But after we do that, after we have the political will, the next thing is, the reality is we can have all the will in the world, but it'll take capital. We are spending about $1.5 million in my district, and we're only 16,000 students. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas, right outside of Fort Worth. We have about 16,000 students, but we'll spend $1.5 million since March. We've spent $1.5 million since March just to make sure all of our kids have devices. But guess what? 1.5 million don't purchase devices. It actually allows us to lease. And so that is a recurring cost that'll occur over and over and over again. And so what we gotta be really clear about is, do we really believe all of our students deserve access? And if we do, the next question is, do we have the political will to write the legislation so that funding will take care of the gaps that we see? We know that we can close the gaps if we have the access. And my deal is, I think it's our time to really find the way. And I think what Reverend Jackson was saying earlier, you know, we have, the cement is still wet. We have the opportunity with the Biden administration and with the new education department to really make our voice known that access to technology is not a luxury. That is a floor. And we have to be courageous enough to say that, and be courageous enough to say that it's going to cost more in my community than it may cost in other communities, because we're starting at different points. And so I just want to make sure that from a national standpoint, we recognize that there's funding available, there's legislation that available, and what we have to do is make sure we get behind it and we're ready to support it.
Well, no, I totally agree with that, Dr. McFarland, because the bottom line is, in the absence, and I've written about this, of the CARES Act, of actually allocating out direct resources to schools, that was the third attempt that was not necessarily passed, which was an extension of the HEROES Act. We now have students that will actually feel the effect of the expiration of that money. Come December 31st of this year, that money that many states actually finagled around to pay for some educational resources is going to expire. And so again, what do we do in those cases when we do not have the sustainable? I'm working on a piece right now, and I'm so excited about this conversation in so many ways, which is sort of a spinoff of our No Child Left Behind Act, which is no child left offline, and what that looks like in terms of the type of universal service that we need to be bringing to students. And this comes from talking to folks like yourselves, 1,400, 1,500 over the course of a few months. I do want to pick up on, and I know, Eric, I'll start with you, and then I'll go to Dr. McFarland, and I'll switch over to Dr. Trimble. Eric, are you a doctor? Because I want to make sure I'm giving you appropriate credit. My mama said when I got my degree, I always say doctor.
Not yet, but one day I will be. But
okay, so soon to be Dr. Eric.
I'm honored to be among a panel of doctors, though. That's great.
You're gonna get it. Dr. McFarland did speak about political will. What about corporate will? So we have seen companies like Comcast, Verizon, T-Mobile, others, Charter, step up to the plate and decide to do some things that would not interrupt the services for young people, extend their eligibility programs to students, regardless of whether or not they want the free or reduced price lunch program, and actually give other resources like devices, like training to help students and schools during this period. What do you think about the role of corporate philanthropy in this space as well?
Yeah, I think for our case, when we were connecting students to internet Comcast Essentials and also using the T-Mobile hotspots, like, it definitely came in handy, and we appreciated that support. I think something that we had to really navigate and really work through was also just community trust with these corporate industries, and just realizing that there is a lack of trust that comes from the community because they thought that things that are quote unquote free may come with strings attached. And I think what that takes is just like grassroots working with the folks that are in the community, having them understand what these like tools and essentials are. And it's like working with the community to actually see what they actually need, to actually connect with them to see what those individual needs are for each individual family, each individual community and neighborhood. But yeah, I think overall, like, it is critical that these companies start considering what the needs are, because I think without actually planning with the most marginalized in mind, it'll be easy to overlook with these situations and the problems that arise with these particular families and particular students that we serve. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that we should continue to tap into. I think these industries should certainly start like really considering how they can really dive deep into the communities that are being served here and really get to know these folks, because there has to be a two-way street where they know the people that they're serving, the people they're providing the service to, and that also it develops that sense of trust between the community and these industries. And overall, I mean, it's for the benefit of our students, and I think that that's something that we need to keep on pursuing at the end of the day if we're at this same kind of mission to serve our students to the best of our ability.
Yeah, no, I mean, Dr. McFarland, what about that aspect of corporate philanthropy or other types of philanthropy sort of matching with what government has not provided?
Well, yeah, I definitely think it's important that we begin to challenge our corporate philanthropy, our corporate donors, other businesses that are actually capitalizing in many cases off of the community. And this is an opportunity for them to be able to give back. I do think that when we can align what it is we're doing with what these foundations and nonprofits are doing, I think there's synergy there. And many of them have stepped up during this process. But the question is how much and for how long? And I think it's important for us to be real clear about what that relationship looks like. Right now, they have been great partners, and we want to make sure that partnership continues on. But I do believe that there is a responsibility for government. I do believe there's a responsibility for our religious establishments as well to come to the table. I think it will take a community collaborative effort to help us get through this digital gap that we all experience and we all feel on a daily basis.
Dr. Nicole?
Yes, sir.
I'm concerned that This stuff starts homeroom, house to classroom, homeroom, classroom.
Yes.
That we must somehow figure out a way to go to the root of the thing. Let's say that George Floyd was choked to death, lynched. Whole world said, stop lynching us. Biden versus Trump, we said we want Biden, not Trump, for all the reasons. We're not making the same big decision about education. That Black Lives Matter, strong minds break strong change, that matters too. So we must become obsessed with learning the ways that it becomes a level of liberation.
Yes.
That's on the state of during slavery time, the slave master beat a man and raped a woman and his property. He could be arrested for it. But if he was caught teaching slavery really right, then he was subject to jail. So there's been this cultural obsession with keeping us ignorant for a long time. We got to figure out how the impact education, for example, the NFL and the NBA, we're involved in impacting, let's vote, let's vote, let's vote, let's vote, let's vote. It's the same type movement on let's learn, let's learn, let's learn, let's learn. We can figure out what the language ought to be, but somehow we must have the marshaling of our forces, bottom up. Philanthropy, be damned. I mean, whatever the government, at the end of the day, we give it, we're the people demand, right? We're not demanding our type of education, not really.
Yeah. You know, Reverend, I think you make a good point, and I'll go to Kathy, I'll go to you next on actually this question, because when I went to visit you, it's really stuck in my heart. I mean, what Reverend Jackson is saying, everybody, is when we let education lapse, we're essentially writing off a ticket, a population, a cohort of people who are the next generation of jobs, not necessarily for this decade, but for the next. And what does that look like if we do not have young people who are prepared for those future of industries? My 14-year-old, she does not like being on Zoom for eight hours a day. I don't like being on Zoom for 8 hours a day. But one of the things I had to say to her the other day is, but you're learning new skills for the new economy, an economy that's not going to require you to be in the office, one that's going to have a workforce that works all over the world, one that requires you to report in at different times because it's very disaggregated. To Reverend's point, this has to be important because at the end of the day, it's going to impact the future of work. And one of the statistics that I heard the other day that was very disturbing is that if we do not get these connections to learning right, we will find ourselves by 2025 not having anybody available to work in these jobs. And Kathy, this brings a question that Reverend is talking about in terms of an all hands on deck strategy. One of the things I realized when I was actually doing the book tour is that it doesn't necessarily mean that schools are by themselves. Schools exist within communities, right? I mean, when I was in school, and I know there are people who know me that are watching, and I'm not going to tell my age, but we actually went to school, and then after that, we went to the YMCA, or we went to the local church, or we did homework in the basement of a neighbor's house. When we think about trying to get kids back into physical school buildings, is it a chance, Dr. Trimble, and I'll also relate this question to the other educators, that we need to reimagine education generally? Or do we need to keep waiting until a vaccine is available to get this right, or the right distance between the desks? Because I'm concerned that we've not leveraged the vacant buildings, office buildings that are sitting in communities that could be repurposed into classrooms. Or like Reverend was talking about, partnerships with professional associations to sponsor moving a digital parking lot, that kids are sitting in the parking lots of Taco Bell to do their homework, and not sponsoring a digital park where they can sit outside with benches and chairs and actually do it in a humane way. So I'm just curious, Dr. Trim, I'll start with you. Should we be really pushing on more community partnerships as opposed to just forcing our kids back into the school doors, perhaps being a little bit more imaginative for this next administration on educational outcomes and where we learn?
I was in a meeting on yesterday with a group of people that were trying to, and the conversation was support for Perry County schools and support for Perry County. And it's kind of hard to even articulate what that could possibly look like. Because, you know, there are always those people that come in with their Superman capes on, and they're going to save the universe, and we're going to save these poor children. But unless you're here, and unless you see and understand, as you pointed out earlier, Nicole, rural also includes Black and brown people. But when you're in a community that is divided and no one wants to, I don't even want to use the word lend that hand. No one wants to do that philanthropy for this group of people because I'm sick of lending a hand. So when you talk about, Reverend said something about we have to be obsessed with education just as much as we are about liberation. I totally agree. But when there are people who feel like, and I alluded to George Wallace earlier, but when there are people who feel like they did back in the 60s, you know, the more we educate them, the more dangerous they are. So I'm not working to help to educate them. We had last year, there were $9 million Governor Kay Ivey did in the state of Alabama for broadband connectivity throughout the state of Alabama for rural areas. I saw that and I went berserk. I was like, yes, absolutely. So we've got to be in that number. Guess what? We were not in that number. So I started digging and trying to figure out why did Perry County, who's one of the poorest counties in the state of Alabama, did not receive it. And it came back to me was, well, nobody spoke up on your behalf. Your legislators or whoever that was supposed to apply for this grant didn't even do it. So when we're talking about the what, I have to start with the who. Who's going to be that voice? Who's going to, and even when we talk about the school and how it looks, absolutely. I'm at the point right now, we're rebranding our school based on what we're dealing with. School as it was will never be school as it was. School, it will never be. So how do we not focus on and not get so tied up in what we don't have and start looking at what we do have and let's make the most of it. I was just in the room, and that's why I was late. I'm gonna be honest with you. I was just in the room. I have tons and tons of stuff that I'm trying to get out to parents that, hey, things that they can utilize so that we can understand school is gonna be different. And how can we as a school, and I've gone out, I am exhausted. I'm gonna tell you, I'm exhausted, but I'm not tired. I'm exhausted, but not tired. From beating bushes and saying, who can help us to get these things that our students need and our parents need? And I just did a blog on the positive pandemics, the positive of the pandemics. And one of the things is the edu team. The edu team. These are teams that are educating us. We've been so behind educating them, but now they're educating us. So when you ask that question, Nicole, yes, it is different. Yes, it should be different. Yes, it will be different. Yes, we should be leveraging those vacant buildings to see what can we do. We're trying to get pod schools. Yes, we should be. Okay, but anyway, yes, we should be. I'm sorry.
You see why, Reverend and Steve, I invited Dr. Trimble, right? You see why?
You know, Doctor, I asked you a question. Who? Nobody will save us for us but us.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, when Push Excel was on another plane, we think the parent-teacher joint venture. Take the child to school, make the child see the shakes, home numbers, all that. Now, of course, it's different because we're virtual. But we're not as on fire as we must become in our houses. And that's where the churches and the disc jockeys fit in this thing. And what I call these proud athlete, entertainer, educator type people. Influence educators, I call it, influence educators. We need them, because LeBron James or whoever can reach more of those kids in a minute, you can reach in years. So we have to figure out how to incorporate them in a new model. So that they, the thing, LeBron finished high school only. You think he finished university. He studied. He always conjugates something verb, right? He talks well, thinks well. He's really educated. Because if we play University of Alabama, we read football heroes on Saturday afternoon. On Monday morning, we can't teach, you can't read, you can't write. It's not progress. So I'm anxious for us to think through. I hear what the pedagogy you guys are saying. Somehow we got to figure out how to get massive parents involvement in this thing.
That's right. Well, and that's the thing, Reverend, what you're talking about, it's no child left offline, but it's also no educator left offline too, right? Because we also have teachers who are sitting in those parking lots actually accessing connectivity to move forward. I mean, I want to pivot to Eric and Michael on this whole question of, we have this opportunity now to speak to a new administration. Oh, and for those of you that are listening out there, if you have a question, follow directions that Bishop Smith gave you, tweet us the question or submit it so that we can ask in the last 10 minutes of this conversation. But going back to Eric and Michael, what would be the top request of a new administration that you may ask of to ensure that we actually begin to address this broadband inequality the same way we look at the systemic inequalities and consequences, honestly, that I mentioned earlier of kids not being connected in some meaningful way? Eric, want to go to you? Like, what would be, without being a policy wonk like myself and others, which is why actually I have to tell you, which is why I love panels like this, because I think, Reverend, to your point too, and I think Michael has also said it as well, a couple of people, we need to bring the folks to Washington, because right now Washington is bringing the solutions to the people. So Eric, you're on.
Yeah, no problem, I appreciate it. So I think kind of also similar to the question you were asking just previously too, just thinking about like how school is going to look coming back. And I think what's something, and just in my own personal reflections and thinking about this whole experience, we've really started to realize the importance of in-person learning for students and how critical that is. I mean, there's been a point where, I mean, kind of jokingly, teachers have been joking around and saying like, we're going to be replaced by, you know, educational platforms and things like that. We know now that is not the case. We see how important those human connections are. But I think what's really critical, and starting to realize that in this day and age right now that we've been in month 10 of the pandemic, is that if we do plan to return to school so we can have those human to human interactions and have that support that is so essential, especially for our Black and brown children, is to make sure that we have first the funds to be able to get the tools and get the things that are necessary to make sure that we have a safe way of returning. I also think too, like one of the frustrating things that, at least the pressures that I've started to feel and sense, is like this rush to go back to a school setting. Thanks again, we've been very fortunate to remain completely virtual. But yeah, there's been this like pressure to return without this sense of like safety first. And I think that's one of the critical things that we need to understand first is like, what are the things that need to happen in order to make sure that we do return, but we return in a safe manner? That means that we're thinking about smaller class sizes. So that means hiring more teachers. That also means utilizing space differently within our building. That also means using the right tools to make sure we're measuring temperatures. We're getting COVID checks regularly until this passes, and things like that. So I think funding is like so critical in making sure that we have the right tools that we can to make sure that not only our students are safe, our staff members are safe, but also the community that we serve, because that's the thing that also gets left off too, is that like not only the students and the staff are gonna get infected, but also the families that they come home to as well. So it's a larger problem there, but I would definitely advocate for the funding that we need to make sure that it is something that we have with tools that we have to make sure it's safe, and also that we hire the right amount of people, especially if we're thinking about smaller class sizes.
I love that. I love that. Dr. McFarland?
You know, just kind of along those lines, I think the administration needs to deal with the universal access to technology. And I think that needs to be clear that as a floor, as an expectation, that we're going to provide universal access to technology. And I think funding needs to follow. But it's important when we talk about funding following, we need to make sure that in the legislation, there is some safeguards, because what's happened here recently with the CARES Act and funding will flow down through the state. The funding will get through the state, and then the state has the ability to kind of divvy out funding how they choose. What we believe is that without the funding can follow, but without the federal oversight, then you still rely on the same system that created the disparities to actually now correct them. And so what we're saying, it's kind of like Title I and other things, that we need funding to flow, but funding needs to actually flow to the people that's needed, and not get hung up in state government. And the reality is, block grants and things like that are not successful for students who need them. We need legislation to flow to the local level so we can make decisions and ensure universal access to technology. Also, we talk about standards, and standards are critical, but we need to be clear about what digital literacy is and what it means, and what we can guarantee for our kids across our nation as well. So I think attention to digital literacy standards are important. And then again, the piece that we often miss is the mental health piece. The reality is this pandemic has created a mental health crisis that is really right below the surface. And so we can correct the digital divide, but we're still going to have some mental health needs in our communities that we're going to need support with. We face it daily within our schools right now, and we know that it'll only be magnified as this pandemic persists.
Oh my gosh, you both have given me a couple things, and Rev, I'm gonna let you jump in. I just have to say this with Dr. McFarland there. Universal access to broadband is key, right? And we don't have, outside of Reverend and Bishop Smith and myself, people who are actually fighting that. We must, folks, relitigate the contract, the social contract of what universal access looks like. And what that means is we need to make that money available just like we make money available for food insecurities and housing insecurities. It was shameful that schools could not get access to universal service support simply because the current structure of broadband access is tied up under the USAC, which is controlled by the FCC, which is still based on an incremental reimbursement or cost basis that gets to people after it comes out of taxpayers' pockets. First and foremost, there's not a lot of people contributing to that fund. And secondly, without it being on a national treasury line item or within the schools, which you just said, which is why I'm trying to do this no child left off line, you can't get it quick enough. There are so many schools across the country that told me like we are still waiting for our computers. In fact, the only reason Dr. Trimble had laptops and iPads is because she had that before the pandemic, decades old. And the same thing with my daughter's school. So I love the fact that when we have this new presidency come in, the first thing they need to do is look at this social contract around universal service and figure out ways to modernize programs like infrastructure that focus on rural broadband only, make it focus also on urban, affordability programs like Lifeline and other appropriations like E-rate, and then also figure out where we just focus on telehealth, maybe we need to do more on education or intersect all of these inequalities. But right on point, in addition to, I think, with what we've heard so far around being very realistic around what we're focusing on, what we're trying to fund. Reverend, I know you were trying to pop in there, but I just had to get it off my mind.
We got screwed. Look here. We're having an education summit Thursday night. You guys invited me to be part of that too. You get details from Steve. Okay. It says education. 54 is no longer race-based, it's tax-based. Well, those who have money have better education, those don't. So that's a fundamental issue around it. It should be education-based, proper compensatory education, right? Or should be just race-based. Because if we keep it as it is now, the gap is wide when we come to school every day. Some kids will never go back to school. So we're getting computers in jails, teaching children STEM, while in jail, the apps and codes and programming. Where we can find them, we take them right there. We went to jail last week and voting in. About 4,000 kids in jail, and all of them voted. And I said, Reverend, why should I vote? What's that? I said, well, voters, you go upstairs to court, you want all white jurors and all black jurors. Well, all those arrests said, well, jurors. So you didn't know that. That's education too. You vote for the judge too, and the state's attorney too, and the sheriff too. Teaching political education is all of making learning make sense. Mm-hmm. Once you saw you had the power to elect judges and be a jury, you know what to do. We got to teach bottom up. It seems to me. Another thing, I want you guys to join the Rainbow Push Coalition. Remember www.rainbowpush.org, because no matter how good we are, we must have an organization to fight back with. Case in point, if you go to Northville, we're going to get a flood. People who could swim, who didn't join this round, who could swim inside the ark, they survived. I lived in Fort Houston, Fort Worth, on back to here. We should become an organized force. We must become a force. We on this phone, we must meet with the Ministry of Education together ourselves.
Yes.
Meet with Telecom ourselves together. So I wish you would take into account the needs of rainbowpush.org, join today, and begin to we have to build a movement. Some total parts will never come together unless we have a movement and an organized arc of our own. I don't think anybody else will save us for us but us. I thank you so much for being on today. Go for your best set.
No, I think Reverend is right. And first of all, if you don't know much about the Rainbow Push Coalition, you've heard it from Reverend Jackson, but I think you also need to see that the passion that comes through on this webinar is the same passion that comes through in person. I mean, part of the challenge and what we've tried to do in the Telecom Symposium, working under the leadership of Bishop Smith, is ensure that equity is something that links with these types of conversations. Because, you know, as Reverend is sort of insinuating, my friends, this challenge that we're having today is almost reminiscent of the challenges that we've had with other communications policies that have served to redline or exclude communities of color. And what makes this period, and I'm going to end with this question, and then I'll open it up to see what questions that we have, because I want to make sure we respect people's time. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this goes back to, and I think I'm in a pretty good group to ask this, where we center racial equity in school generally. And so, as Reverend just suggested, I think George Floyd's moment, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds that was seen around the world, was not new to the Black community or the Latino community or the beige community, the Asian community, but it was a reminder that we're not necessarily paying attention to the type of racial equity that needs to be at the center of the policies that we actually put forth in our schools. So I would love all of you just sort of end with this comment. I mean, should we be starting to think about addressing issues like our systemic inequalities, like digital inequity, having also a campaign to center racial equity in the center of how we teach, how we engage, and how we track our kids? Because I don't know about you all, but I'm just kind of afraid that all the work that you all have done for many, many years in education around race equity is sort of reversed in these last 4 years. So, Eric, I'll go with you first. Race equity in the center?
Yeah, I think it should always be at the center of
you know, you got to say yes at a Rainbow Push conference, right?
If you haven't started thinking about that already as an educator, then you need to do that ASAP. But I mentioned that phrase before, like planning with the most marginalized in mind at first, especially when you're thinking about, like, in my capacity as a principal, I have to look at the school policies and things that we're doing to make sure that we are treating the students fairly and making sure we're planning with those students that we are considering most marginalized, that they have advantages that they deserve just as much as any other student. But yeah, I think especially with this past administration, we've definitely dealt with some stress or traumatic stress from it. I think it's something that needs to be acknowledged with our students and our families, especially after this incident with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others that have happened just in this year. It's something that I've had to really own and know as a school leader, just that how it's really affecting our students, and just take moments where it's like, hey, right now, yes, academics are important, but so is the mental health of our students. Take time to deal with that with our students if they have questions or need that space to talk. And we've had to do that. And I think the talking is important, but also the action is important too, and what we need to do. And that's the next step. It's like, what do we need to do to make sure that this doesn't continue? Because just to be transparent, I was named principal of this school in November, and I've already had to release statements for over 4 different incidents where we've had to address the unfortunate murder of Black and brown people at the hands of police. So that's crazy that I've had to do that, and I've only been a principal for about a year.
Look, I was just about giving you support, but we're praying for you, my friend, because this has been a tough time. Really, really a tough time.
No,
Dr. Trimble, what about you? I mean, I already know what you're gonna say, but just say it again, my sister. Say it again.
Well, I'm going to say this. One of the things that in the midst of as we started planning for this school year, we looked at those things that were prevalent and that was going on in the lives of our students. And of course, we had the pandemic, but then the other thing that we had also was a protest, and then the political views and the political aspects of what was going on nationally. So we sat down as a staff and said, how do we incorporate those things? Because as I said before, yes, reading, writing, arithmetic is great. But at this point in time, what these children are dealing with is the pandemic, is the political world that was going on, and as well as I was saying before. So we had to look at we thought about looking at developing cultural awareness. And when we talked about developing cultural awareness, the protest was the other one. We talked about developing cultural awareness. It wasn't just on a national scene, but then also from a local perspective, these students' home cultures. We had to take a look at those things too. And that also involved, which took us back to what we're talking about now, this digital divide, what they're actually dealing with. But we're focusing on cultural awareness. And I know that's a term that's thrown around a lot nowadays, but not just in education, but in politics and in the media too. But in my experience teaching here, it is very important that our students understand who they are, what they're dealing with, and then how they can propel to be better than what they are viewed from a racial perspective. So yes, from culture, we're focusing on cultural awareness. The pandemic has caused us to do that. The protest has caused us to do that. And then the political environment has caused us to do that. And I do think that that is shaping and molding our students to be, going back to what you spoke about earlier, Nicole, to being different and school being different than what it has been before. Because like I said, we're not just focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic. We're having to have those conversations with these students. We're having to have those conversations not only with these students, but with staff members who may not look like our students and who do not understand what they're feeling, how they're feeling, and the emotional and mental toll that the George Floyd incidents and the Breonna Taylor incidents and what they're having on our students. So when you have a teacher that's coming in and saying, well, my father was the police, so I always side with the police, we need to have some conversations, you know, and it goes beyond police and color, but it goes beyond understanding perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, what people often do not realize about racism, that it normalizes violence. And like Reverend said, when violence is normalized, we as marginalized populations, who are, by the way, are very resilient in the fact that we have survived the slave trade up until now, but we expect that and we think that it's okay. And I agree with you, it's not okay.
It's not okay.
It's not okay.
And that's but that's something that we're having to, those are conversations that we're also having to have with our students, that things that stereotypes are not okay. We are better and we are beyond that.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Dr. McFarland.
Yeah. So, you know, from my perspective, you know, equity is definitely at the center, should be at the center of our work. But it's important that as we reach for and search for solutions, that we don't grab at simple solutions to a very complex problem. The reality is, for us to start trying to solve the equity problem by only dealing with culturally responsive training, and we need that. We need the culturally responsive training. We need awareness and all that. But the reality is, most of these issues come from an institution. And so the institutions that we create are built upon these concepts that are not built, where equity is not important. So it's institutionalized. And a lot of the things that we have in our systems are institutionalized, and our systems have systematized racism and equity and other discrimination. And so unless our solutions address not only the practical everyday work of the teacher, if they only stop there, then we fall short of the goal. We have to have an institutional and systemic approach to undoing some of these inequities and some of these systems of inequity that have been established for quite a while. And it takes everyone working toward that.
Go ahead, Reverend.
Yeah, I'm gonna repeat that. We're in a life and death genocidal issue here. This pandemic is real, really real. Yes, I was informed with people in Geneva who were trying to get killing of Black people. The United Nations Commission on Genocide to address these killings of our people. That's a big issue. But in Chicago, we can't have funerals and weddings, can't have Thanksgiving dinner together. Real stuff. We're in the middle of germ warfare. So surviving is a big part about it. So just surviving the germ warfare. I don't know where it come from, but it's raging. So please, let's work on that together. And then you mentioned about education number 3. After pulmonary disease or something. Where's education on that list? I mean, COVID-19 is number 3. Where's education on this? We have not decided yet that we can, we will, we must learn to read, write, and count, and think as a people. We work together. I always come in physically sometimes. Some of these boys, impact educators, these guys, they turn many voters out for the first time. Jackson voted for the first time, good stuff. But we've not decided to really deal with learning. That's kind of a point of view. Please, parents must accept much greater responsibility. poor notwithstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, Reverend, I agree with you. I keep thinking about every time that you talk about education as, you know, a civil rights issue, something that you've talked about for many, many, many years, is that I'm always reminded of Carter G. Woodson's piece, When You Control a Man's Thinking, which goes back to just how embedded the types of structural discrimination and racism is in our society, and how this inflection point that we all are at is we're realizing, as Reverend has said, and as all the panelists have suggested, that this pandemic, it's a lot. And it's been a lot to not only impact the chronic health disparities that impact people of color, but it also has made its way into our educational, economic, and civil life. And so thinking about how do we actually get back to a state where, honestly, we will never be normal, but as a community, going back to what Dr. Trimble said, we will be okay. Because again, I was talking to some friends over the weekend, the resiliency that mother had as she crossed along in the transatlantic slave trade to ensure that her child would not be oppressed as her, the resiliency that we have had to experience not just George Floyd in contemporary times, but the previous other men and women who have been lynched, the resilience that we've had to stand aside alongside our brothers and sisters who fight against regressive and aggressive immigration policies, they all point back to one thing, that we are still here and that these issues still matter. And so what I would like to say to all of you as we end this, we have a long way to go when it comes to broadband access and adoption, which is why folks like myself, Reverend Jackson, Steve Smith, and others.
Can we get together sometime in the group chat? Can we get together again sometime soon?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you know, I was gonna mention it as a meeting.
We hear the stuff from this river.
Yeah, let's actually, we're doers at Rainbow Push. I mean, I work at Brookings, but I'm always an RPC fan for life. When you get your pen, you'll never lose it. It'll stay endeared to your heart. But we need to have a meeting to actually follow up. And Reverend, by the way, a lot of what we talk about is going in my book. So when this book come out, y'all got to support my book because it's actually going to bring all of the...
My book, just sermons and speeches.
That's right.
In this book. So Amazon.com. My books, read the book. But I want to thank.
Reverend, mine will be on Amazon though, so.
I want to thank you so much for participating. I look forward to this meeting again soon because we must, in principle, and in rural Alabama, we must somehow hook up. I want to thank Steve Smith as the executive producer of this program today for his work. Really want to thank you. How can we, as the four of us, need to have another meeting soon by Zoom.
Okay, I'm on it. Steve, make it on the calendar for you. But
yep, I'm on it.
Make it happen. Thank you, everybody, for this. I know I'm going to pass it over to Bishop Smith, but again, I want to thank everybody that tuned in, and I would suggest to all of you, share this widely. This is what is happening in the real world. These are the faces of the digital divide. Thank you. I'm very humbled to have participated in this and been your endured leader. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, and thank you to all of our panelists. I'm looking forward to the discussion that's going to continue out of this. On tomorrow, by way of announcements or a shameless plug, if you will, Rainbow Push is going to continue in this discussion on educational disparities and developing an education agenda on tomorrow at 7 o'clock with Dr. Sonia Whitaker, Dr. Jeanette Wilson, and Dr. Julian Malvo, along with Reverend Jackson. So join us on tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, and 4 p.m. Pacific Standard. So we look forward to having this discussion. We also want to thank all of our sponsors for their benevolence in assisting us in supporting this. I want to raise Verizon, Charter Communications, the Motion Picture Association of America, T-Mobile, and all of our sponsors. But right now we're going to turn it over to listen to just a short or a small greeting from one of our sponsors in a second. I'll be in touch with all of you. You guys were excellent. Thank you so much. See you later.
I am Michelle Coburn, and Verizon is proud to support this year's annual Media and Telecommunications Symposium. The theme of this year's conference, Charting a Path Forward for Digital Education and Economic Inclusion, is squarely aligned with Verizon's values. The COVID-19 pandemic, economic crisis, and national reckoning with systemic racism have put education and economic issues at the forefront of our nation's priorities. And the challenges faced by Black and Brown communities are more urgent than ever. Rainbow Push and the Citizenship Education Fund are at the forefront of finding ways to create equity and opportunities for communities of color during these unprecedented times. Verizon values our partnership and has redoubled our own efforts to address these issues. Verizon, as an employer, partner, and corporate citizen, has a responsibility to address issues that affect us all. As a large corporation, we have an obligation not only to our shareholders and customers, but also to society as a whole. That is why we are committed to making a meaningful and lasting contribution toward change and reform. When schools were faced with the incredible challenge of closing their doors because of the pandemic, we acted quickly and rolled out discounted broadband plans for school districts so that they could provide broadband to low-income students at no cost. We also negotiated statewide broadband arrangements so that thousands of school districts did not have to waste valuable time negotiating with us individually. And the discounted pricing available in these arrangements has enabled school districts to provide their students, particularly the most vulnerable, reliable connectivity at no cost. This year, we launched Citizen Verizon, our plan to drive economic, environmental, and social advancement. Through Citizen Verizon, we are working to address barriers to digital inclusion. As schools closed and millions of students were forced to learn from home, Verizon launched a distance learning solution that is available to school districts across the country. We are providing affordable, reliable internet access to keep students connected to their schools, teachers, and each other through the Verizon Distance Learning Program. The program is available to more than 38 million students in 40 states and the District of Columbia. Also through Citizen Verizon, we are launching a program to upskill and reskill 500,000 people over the next decade, and to place 50% of program graduates into paid jobs within 3 months of program completion. We are also continuing our transformative Verizon Innovative Learning Program. Through this program, Verizon provides free broadband connectivity and devices, along with STEM-focused curriculum to 265 Title I schools across the country. These students are learning the skills they need to thrive in a digital economy. Our goal is to increase participation to 350 schools in 2021. And Verizon is investing deeply in supporting criminal justice reform. We understand how unjust practices in our criminal justice system affect our communities, customers, and employees. At the federal and state level, Verizon supports legislation that advances fair policing practices, criminal records expungement, juvenile resentencing, and fair wages for incarcerated individuals. We have also provided free legal assistance to currently and formerly incarcerated people navigating our extremely complex legal system. Through all of this, Verizon stands with Rainbow Push and the Citizenship Education Fund to ensure that our most underserved communities have access to digital tools and are prepared to fully engage in a tech-driven global economy. Verizon builds the networks that move the world forward. But in moving the world forward, we should not leave our most vulnerable behind. We desire a future that is inclusive, a future that is equitable, a future where we all prosper. And we will continue to work with partners like Rainbow Push and Citizenship Education Fund so that together we will move the world forward.
Again, thank you so much for joining us today for our first session for the Rainbow Push Annual Media and Telecom Symposium, Join us again tomorrow at 12 o'clock from 12 to 1:15. We will hear a keynote address from the Federal Communications Commissioner, Jeffrey Starks, and then we will hear a panel discussion. The topic, what COVID-19 has taught us about digital equity or the lack thereof. Our moderator is Dominic Harrison from the Aspen Institute. Join us tomorrow at the same time, 12 o'clock to 1:15 p.m. tomorrow. See you there.